There's a video that annoys me. It annoys me for several reasons, but most of all, it annoys me because I agree with it. This video is only 40 seconds long and it is called There Is No Good and Bad Music. It was posted on the 6th of January 2024 by the one and only Jacob Collier, who, for those who aren't familiar, is a fairly distinguished musician. He's won like a Grammy, or 7. Now, I'll talk more about him later, but what you need to know for now is that he's not just famous for his music, but also for aggressively sharing his creative advice online. And the video in question is an example of this. It's him giving creative advice. And I agree with almost everything he has to say in these 40 seconds. And I also disagree with a lot of things he doesn't say. And most of all, I disagree with how he says it. The agenda for today is pretty simple. I'm going to show you this annoying video, explain why it annoys me, argue for and against all of his points, and go thoroughly off topic. It should be a pretty good time. So, without further ado, I present There Is No Good and Bad Music.
I don't know who needs to hear this today, but there's no such thing as good music and bad music. It's just the music that feels right for you. There's no such thing as good technique and bad technique, just the technique that works for you. There's no less is more or more is more, it's just the amount that feels right for you. You can literally make anything you want. Every rule is arbitrary, nothing and nobody is pure, and you don't need to be an expert at something to contribute something of value. Just build yourself a language of the stuff that is important to you. Pull shamelessly from every school of thought and absorb as much as you can. Open your heart and say who you are.
This is a weird video to get annoyed by, right? Like, it is completely inoffensive, but I'm annoyed. I'm annoyed because I agree with him. Now, what does that actually mean? Well, what he's saying sounds shallow, right? It sounds pretentious. He speaks like he's just spewing cryptic inspirational jargon with no real basis or theory behind it. Now, this makes him sound stupid, but more importantly, it removes all credence from what he's actually saying. I genuinely think that this is a collection of reasonable, practical advice, but he's being so vague and so general that you'll only know what he means if you already know what he means. And I think I do. I think I have a pretty good idea of what Jacob is trying to say with these points, because I am ravaged with an all-consuming Jacob Collier obsession. This man made what I consider to be the greatest album of all time, then went on to explain in great technical and emotional detail as to why this music was so special, and ever since has been completely unable, or perhaps unwilling, to create anything of remotely similar quality, following it with this 5-hour 54-track giga poppy nothing album that I have no kind words for. I don't understand how this is possible. You can't make music this good on accident. I would know. But you don't make music this bad on purpose. And yet, these two pieces of art are made by the same person. My greatest hero and greatest villain are the same person, and I just have to accept that somehow? Well, I don't want to accept that. Which is why I've watched basically every single video of Jacob, talking about his methodology or philosophies, be it a live stream, or an interview, or a podcast, or just him chatting on stage. I'm not saying I can read his mind necessarily, I can't, but everything he says in this short, I've heard him say before, just with a bit more detail. And that's what I'll be providing today. Detail. My hope is to remove as much ambiguity as possible to replace the dalliance of incoherent interpretation with cold, hard discussion. Now, keep in mind that what I'm saying here is just my interpretation. It's not what he's actually saying, it's just what I think he's saying. And this video is not about that interpretation being correct, it's more about that interpretation being interesting. So just take what I have to say at face value, don't attribute it to Jacob, obviously. And finally, before we begin, one more thing. This video is not an attack on Jacob Collier in any way, shape, or form. No, no, no. Yeah, he made some music that I don't like. I can't deny that. But so what? I'm still one of his biggest fans. I'm only critical of him because I revere him. If you're just watching this in the hopes of hearing me talk about how he is pretentious and overrated, leave. Now, I think that's enough yapping. Let's get started.
I don't know who needs to hear this today, but there's no such thing as good music and bad music.
This statement is tricky because everyone has their own interpretation. It's both true and false depending on what you think it means. Fortunately for this statement, I have a cheat code, a source that basically gives concrete evidence as to what Jacob actually means. That source is this book, The Inner Game of Tennis by W. Timothy Galway, which Jacob recommended on a private live stream to 40 viewers back in 2015.
I'd highly recommend reading a book called The Inner Game of Tennis. It's a really, really good book. I mean, amazing, and it's taught me a lot. I read it a few years ago, and I still go back to it, and it teaches you about dividing your ego and your information mind, which wants to label and categorize and gain all the time, and then your I suppose it's kind of like he calls it your self too, which is the other kind of self, which just learns without thinking and learns like a sponge and doesn't apply labels to anything. Learning how to balance these and not let the sort of ego and information bit take over your learning process is massive.
Now, The Inner Game of Tennis is a fantastic book that comes with my highest recommendation, and one thing that it is quite ardent about is a very specific and cautious use of the words good and bad. The rare times it does use them, it's referring to something hyper-specific. Never a measure of quality, only a judgment of value. For example, say you're playing tennis and you hit the ball out. This will lose you the point and probably make you feel quite bad and probably even make your opponent feel quite good. But that doesn't mean the event itself is good or bad. These are just human interpretations, like these are labels applied retrospectively. But in reality, the ball is neither good or bad. It can't be good or bad. It's just out. Let me paraphrase a small section of the book itself. What I mean by judgment is the act of assigning a negative or positive value to an event. In effect, it is saying that some events within your experience are good and you like them, and other events in your experience are bad and you don't like them. You don't like the sight of yourself hitting a ball into the net, so you call that bad, but you judge as good the sight of your opponent being aced by your serve. Thus, these judgments are our personal ego reactions to the sights, sounds, feelings and thoughts within our experience. Galway then goes on to explain why he's against using these judgmental terms, and the reason is pretty simple. Being in a judgmental state of mind makes it very easy to judge yourself, which lends very quickly to bitter self-criticism. I quote, "It is interesting to see how the judgmental mind extends itself. It may begin by complaining, 'What a lousy serve,' then extend to, 'I'm serving badly today.' After a few more bad serves, the judgment may become further extended. 'I have a terrible serve,' 'I'm a lousy tennis player,' and finally, 'I'm no good.' First, the mind judges a single event, then groups events, then identifies with the combined event, and finally judges itself. As a result, what usually happens is that these self-judgments become self-fulfilling prophecies. Now, I wouldn't read you the whole book, but this is what Jacob means when he's talking about good or bad music.
Not an ideal way of learning, because with learning you should be able to enjoy and embrace all of your mistakes and not to make a judgment about it, not to sort of say that's a bad mistake and so I'm bad, that's just the worst. And that happens to everybody. It's happened to me.
So, in summary, there is no good or bad music because there can't be good and bad music. It's just sine waves. Any value assigned to it is arbitrary. But just because it can't be good or bad doesn't mean it can't be well made and poorly made. Even without value, there is quality. Now, this sounds like it doesn't make any sense at all. So I have prepared a very thorough example. This song is called Sweetheart Lab, and I wrote it to sound sweet. And to do that, I'm leveraging the quirky mixolydian feeling, and to leverage that, I'm just slamming the flat 7 over the minor 5 as much as possible. Pretty basic stuff. Now here's my genuine attempt to ruin this song as much as possible. Remember what I said 5 seconds ago about that quirky mixolydian feeling? Yeah, that's not there anymore. It's subsumed beneath the tide of bit crush hell. I did put in a lot of effort to make sure every individual part of this song sounds pretty good, but that is meaningless because there is so much going on at once. In terms of pure craftsmanship, I can say, as the craftsman, that only one of these 2 renditions communicates my intent. Only one of them sounds sweet. The other sounds like pure agony. But that doesn't make it bad. You know, the fact that you can barely hear the melody doesn't make it a bad melody. I don't think that means anything. I think that's absurd. But despite the fact that neither of these songs can be good or bad, the ball can still be out. Now, judging a piece of art as a whole is difficult and arbitrary. If you want to look at just technical expertise, you have to ignore several layers of meaning and hyper-focus on just the smallest building blocks, stuff like melody, harmony, and rhythm. It's debatable how important these aspects are, but the fact that they are important is inarguable. Everyone in the world will agree that melody is important to music. Now, different cultures will give it a different level of importance, but no individual would ever deny that melody is at least relevant. And so now that we've reduced the task of quantifying all of music to the task of quantifying just melody, the job becomes a lot easier. Everyone in the world would agree that Jacob Collier has a greater mastery over melody than I do. It's hard to prove, yeah, but equally hard to deny. But that doesn't make him better than me. It doesn't make him good and me bad, despite the fact that part of me wants it to. All it really means is that I've got some practice to do, I guess.
But there's no such thing as good music and bad music. It's just the music that feels right for you.
It's just the music that feels right for you. This statement is true. It's basically a fact. Art is little more than a jumble of aesthetics with cultural significance arbitrarily sewn into its skin. If something feels good to you, then it feels good to you, and you don't need to worry if it's well made or poorly made. Despite this, I hate the phrase, "it's just what feels right to you." I think it is stupid and reductive and impractical, because your tastes change every day, and you can change them on purpose. You can change what feels right to you. But first, I need to disambiguate. There's a difference between personal taste and what I'm going to be calling good taste. Personal taste is just a list of the things you like and dislike. It's wholly subjective. You could even call it personal. But good taste represents your ability to appreciate effort and craftsmanship, to tell what creative decisions have been made where and why and how. The ability to tell if the ball is in or out. And not everyone has good taste. Not everyone can tell the difference. But it's not because some people are better than others. I'm not trying to be elitist here. Some people have good taste for the same reason that some people can juggle. It's a skill. Having good taste is a skill. It takes practice, study, and experience. It's something you can learn. It's something anyone can learn. You can learn good taste. There are so many examples of this in practice that I barely need to prove this point, but one that I'm quite partial to, is this Tom Scott video where he gets James Hoffman to walk him through the basics of coffee.
Well, that was the setup that was initially interesting. It's like, find your perfect coffee.
Yeah.
And then there were like a couple of caveats. You don't like coffee, and sort of not a huge fan of caffeine.
What happens over the course of the video is that Tom tries and compares a bunch of different kinds of coffee. And thanks to the patient encouragement of a leading expert, Tom very quickly goes from knowing literally nothing to having good taste.
You are scoring big points.
Am I?
You're scoring big. I'm going to get a kettle. You're scoring. You're doing very well.
I found a skill.
Or, well, he develops taste, at least. Perhaps not good taste quite yet. Understanding is, of course, not binary. It's a spectrum. So just because you know the difference between cappuccino and espresso doesn't mean you know the difference between different coffee beans, let alone different drinks, let alone different art forms entirely. For Tom to have an objective understanding of a field even as tiny as coffee would require him to compare literally every single coffee ever made, which he doesn't have time for. It would literally kill him doing it. And he kind of just like physically can't. Most coffee hasn't been made yet. Objective understanding probably exists, but it can only ever be approached, never held, at least not by humans. Not that that matters at all. Just because you can't be truly objective doesn't mean you can't be interesting, which, in my opinion, is a bit more interesting. Now, back on topic. When Jacob says it's just the music that feels right to you, he's talking about personal taste. And as we've just discussed, personal taste and good taste are very different. Good taste is understanding, while personal taste is just enjoyment. And I'm not here to try and say that humans have any control over what they enjoy. But you do control what you understand. And the thing is, understanding and enjoyment have a relationship. As your understanding increases, it changes what you enjoy. If you're a casual fan of football, your favourite players are probably just the flashiest ones, the ones that score the most, which is fine. But if you started to seriously play or study the sport, you'd start to appreciate different aspects of the game, stuff like strategy and positioning, or even coaching. These are aspects that are less obvious to a casual observer and certainly much less profitable, but that doesn't make them any less interesting. Furthermore, most of the time when we dislike something, it's purely 100% because we are unfamiliar with it. You can radically change what feels right to you by putting yourself out of your comfort zone and seriously trying something that you otherwise never would have encountered.
It's not pleasant yet because I haven't got used to it.
In essence, what I am saying is that in pursuit of good taste, your personal tastes will evolve. Understanding shapes enjoyment. Now, the interesting thing is that this relationship between understanding and enjoyment is actually different for everyone. For me, that relationship is one-to-one. What that means is that I have absolutely no tolerance whatsoever for something I have to make excuses for in order to enjoy. This is because I'm kind of stupid. Like, if I'm eating a meal that I think could have been made better, oftentimes I don't even finish eating it, even if it's quite good. I just sit there running a mental checklist of every single thing I would have done differently. This is exhausting. It makes me miserable, and it makes me miserable to eat with, which is probably why other, more reasonable people have a much looser relationship. You might be perfectly aware of the fact that pop music uses the same 4 topics ad nauseum. You might also know that most pop music has nearly identical song structure. In fact, you can be acutely aware of the fact that pop music has very witheringly simplistic core musical concepts and fails to expand them over the course of a song and ends up extremely repetitive and banal. You can be completely aware of all of that and still enjoy pop music. Hell, I listen to Laufey religiously. Laufey? I truly love this music. But do I think it's well made? Good taste and personal taste have a relationship, but they aren't the same. My point is this. It's just the music that feels right to you. This statement is true, but more importantly, it's reductive, because it fails to mention that while you don't control what you love, you do control what you understand, and what you understand shapes what you love. It really doesn't take much effort whatsoever to enjoy something that 10 minutes ago didn't feel right to you.
That's so nice.
You can see where people are.
That's
are big
lovely.
fans.
That is so nice. All right, so and the other two here.
As good technique and bad technique, just the technique that works for you. There's no less is more or more is more. It's just the amount that feels right for you. You can literally make anything you want. Every rule is arbitrary.
Every rule is arbitrary, which implies that less is more are rules, which is what I disagree with, this scant implication. Less is more and more is more are not rules, despite the fact that everyone treats them as such. Less is more specifically is often considered some God-sent proclamation of true art, which is just nonsense. Less is more and more is more are not rules. They are tools. They are little tidbits that are occasionally helpful when you're creating. Think of it like salting a dish. If your dish doesn't have enough salt, then more is more. More salt, more flavor. But if you have too much salt, then less is more. And this obviously applies universally. If you're doing too little with your song, then doing more will result in you saying more. If you're doing too much, less is more. This probably explains why less is more is the kind of more revered of the two brother phrases. If for new artists, they generally tend to overcompensate for their insecurities by doing as much as possible, which generally leads to them just obscuring the very point of their art in the first place, such as the quirky Mixolydian feeling. But saying that either of the two phrases is true in isolation is just blatantly false. It doesn't even make basic sense. Phrases such as these two are not axiomatic principles that harbor artistic apotheosis. They're just occasionally helpful. But all this rambling about how these rules are not rules but actually tools is meaningless, because that's not what Jacob was talking about in the first place.
And bad technique, just the technique that works for you. There's no less is more or more is more. It's just the amount that feels right for you.
Yeah, so when he's saying this, he's not talking about less is more or more is more specifically. He's just talking about all conventional wisdom. And what he's saying is that it doesn't exist. Which is true, I guess, but I don't know that it's helpful to phrase it this way. To start with, we all know that all conventions aren't really real. Time isn't real, money isn't real, gender isn't real. All these things have social and financial value, but they don't actually exist. They're aberrant fiction. So the only personal value they have is the value you assign onto them. And what Jacob is suggesting is that you shouldn't value convention just because it is conventional. You shouldn't do something just because other people are doing it. And I think this is fantastic advice. By its very nature, conventional wisdom has to be universal, and as such, it often ends up extremely overgeneralized and useless. So, rather than worrying about what is right, what you should do, or what other people are doing, you should just do what works for you and have fun. Now, this is good advice, but I also have a small nitpick. Such a blanket rebuttal of convention can be deeply unproductive. If you just ignore what other people are doing, you're going to put yourself at a major disadvantage, because obviously knowing what works for others is instrumental in figuring out what works for you. There's the quote, "We stand on the shoulders of giants." We are only able to make modern progress due to the knowledge and wisdom that was left behind by our ancestors. Now, this quote is usually attributed to Isaac Newton, but regardless of whether or not he actually started it, what we know is that the conventional wisdom of his time was incomplete. The knowledge that he studied from was maybe not wrong, but definitely not right. And despite that, he still created his 3 laws of motion, which are a core tenet of modern science 400 years later. The wisdom of his age was flawed, and he still spun that copper into gold. Convention is the giants we stand upon, but it doesn't define the giants we become. Or, In other words, just because something is wrong doesn't mean we can't use it to find out what is right. I think the problem with phrases such as less is more is that they are applied like binding axiomatic principles, like laws of which there are no escape. My suggestion would be, don't treat it like that. Don't treat it like a law or a rule, because, yeah, there are no rules. But don't ignore it either. Like, these tidbits stick around because they are useful. So just consider it. Think about it, you know? Translate it from an instruction into a question. Don't declare less is more. Just ask, am I doing too much? I think that's a pretty easy way of transforming something that is binary into something that is freeing. And this is the use of convention to point out areas of focus that you might not have otherwise considered. I can tell you with certainty that if I had not explicitly been told less is more, it might have taken me a while to figure out on my own. But convention will fail you. Jacob says it perfectly. Every rule is arbitrary. All this advice, all these laws that people made up are just things that people made up. Now, they were made up because they were useful, and they stick around because they continue to be useful. But I also need to caution against how dangerous they can be. It's very easy for a rule of thumb to become a rule.
Yeah, I am definitely afraid of learning the technical language. And the fear is that I will become way less free.
There isn't really a decisive conclusion here. This is one of those annoying, nuanced cases where you can't really wrap up everything neatly. I wouldn't ignore convention, but I certainly wouldn't trust it either.
For you, you can literally make anything you want. Every rule is arbitrary. Nothing and nobody is pure. And you don't need to be an expert at something to contribute something of value.
This one I agree with in full. It's no secret that it often takes the ignorance of convention to break free of its chains. Ironically, I don't actually have that much to say about this one though. He's kind of telling you to leave a comment, contribute, even if you don't know anything. I'm not saying that for algorithmic reasons, by the way. There's not a sly chance in grey hell that this video does well. I just want to read the comments, and I'll respond if I have something to say.
Just build yourself a language of the stuff that is important to you. Pull shamelessly from every school of thought and absorb as much as you can.
Now, I've told friends of mine similar advice to this in the past, and the response I usually get is something like, oh, but that's copying, that's immoral, that's plagiarism. You'd think that Picasso saying, good artists copy, great artists steal, would have settled this dispute, 100 years ago, but I guess we're still here somehow. To start with, plagiarism is an exploit of our economic structure. Why is that a consideration? Why is that part of your artistic thought process? Copyright law does not exist to protect your creative freedom. It, like most laws, exists to protect corporate interests. Any law that would meaningfully stop copying would be a death sentence for all creation. You can't make something new without copying, and that's fine because copying is a good thing. Music makes for the easiest example for this because every genre has a distinct culture of copying. In jazz, when improvising, it is seen as virtuous to incorporate the melodies of other musicians into your solos. This is copying. You're taking what someone else did and adding it to your own repertoire. In hip-hop, a base aspect of the culture is sampling tracks that other musicians have made. This is copying, and no one has a problem with it because it isn't a problem. In classical music, the ideal of classical music is very rarely to achieve a distinct personal identity. More often than not, classical musicians dedicate their lives to perfectly recreating the works of dead European white men. This is copying. Imagine the art school equivalent to this. It would be like a bunch of painters tracing Van Gogh all day. Van Gogh, who himself was a notorious and proud copycat.
He reasoned that he was behaving just like any musician. They are never criticized for performing a piece which they have not composed themselves.
You'd think that that would make classical the genre with the most copying, but then pop music saunters in like that white friend who thinks wearing a different flannel every day constitutes as a personality. Now, all this copying isn't just permissible. Copying is virtuous because it shows you've engaged with the history of the art form. It'd be like in a conversation about Macbeth, you'd be able to quote from memory the relevant portion of the play. This should be a clear sign to other people that you really know what you're talking about, that you've really done your homework. Which is why I stole that line from an Adam Neely video, where he talks about stealing and shows off that he has a girlfriend for some reason. But all this virtuous copying only makes you a good artist. To be a great artist, you must steal. And that doesn't mean to claim the works of others as your own. It means to incorporate the style and techniques of others into your own toolkit. It's about pulling ideas from your influences with the confidence that your ideas are strong enough to subsume them, that you can participate in a work's legacy without being the work. That one was stolen from an Andrew Cunningham video about stealing. And actually, his video doesn't have any girlfriends in it.
Take what you like and rip out what you don't, then fill the gaps with yourself. Your thoughts, your perspective, your fixations, your aesthetic. Rearrange the skeleton to your liking and hang your vision over its bones like a ghoulish monument that says, I can do this too.
This is probably what Jacob is talking about when he says to pull shamelessly. This might sound like abstract and pretentious, but no, this is really like concrete, pragmatic instruction. Look at what your heroes do, copy it until you understand it, and then incorporate that into everything you're already doing. And then repeat that over and over and over and over and over. Ironically, this is how you develop a unique, irreplaceable artistic style. Only through stealing will you be recognized as yourself.
Something to contribute something of value. Just build yourself a language of the stuff that is important to you. Pull shamelessly from every school of thought and absorb as much as you can. Open your heart and say who you are.
Open your heart and say who you are. You know, this video has just been me ranting about common idioms that I don't like. And well, I've saved the worst for last. Be yourself. I think be yourself is one of the stupidest pieces of advice you can give to someone else. And the reason for that is, well, it's in accordance to the theme of this video, I guess you could say. I have recently come to believe that there is no greater strength than sincerity. That our greatest happiness can only exist when we are honest with ourselves about who we are and what we want out of life. That there is nothing more important than being yourself. And I hate this expression. I think it is useless. Imagine a closeted gay person in a deeply homophobic community, completely unable to be honest with themselves about who they are or what they desire. They are afflicted with a great ailment, that they value convention beyond themselves, and this insincerity will poison every aspect of their life. And there is only one cure to this. You can never win the game of conformity. You just have to stop playing. This is the only freedom granted by the rules of our reality. The only escape, the only cure, is to be yourself. But you can't just say that. There's nothing harder to do than to be yourself. Whenever someone tells me to be myself, I get broken out of whatever myself I was in. I get anxious, insecure, I think. Wasn't I being myself already? I think there's a lot wrong with directly giving someone the solution in any circumstance. But I also don't know that this case is that complicated. Telling someone to be themselves is confusing and unhelpful, despite also being correct. So, what should you say? In my opinion, nothing. There's no singular phrase that you can use to immediately jailbreak someone. If there was, you'd already know. This is a problem because it's hard to solve. Just support your friends as long as it doesn't hurt you to do so. Give them advice when they ask for it. Let them solve their own problems and be an example for them to follow. You be yourself to give others permission to do the same. Yeah, so basically my answer to be yourself is telling you to be yourself. What a stupid video.